this week's DCS update, Ugra Media drop the Cold War Germany map, which is fantastic, and Heatblur inject a massive number of changes into the F4E Phantom 2. Well, let's begin this week's episode with the exciting news about the Cold War Germany map from Ugra Media. According to the blurb, the team tell us that no other location better exemplifies the Cold War between NATO and Warsaw Pact forces than the Iron Curtain separating East and West Germany in the 1980s. Massive forces were arrayed on both sides of this heavily fortified frontier that witnessed so much for so many years. Ugra Media has recreated this pivotal what-if scenario with a level of excellence and detail far greater than ever before. It's a 900 by 800 kilometer map, which includes the varied terrain of the rolling hills of southern Germany, the flat northern European plains that served as the corridor to countless historical battles, and the coastlines of the Baltic Sea. The low-level terrain detail makes this map a must-have for attack aircraft and helicopter pilots who just love flying at treetop height. Now, the map is broken into 3 phases. The first phase, which is phase 1, will include 59 military air bases, 4 heliports, 27 general aviation strips, 40 pre-placed SAM sites, and summer textures. Phase 2, as part of the early access development, will add 10 additional air bases along with spring and autumn textures. Phase 3 will add 51 more air bases, winter textures, and the Cold War Assets Pack. Pricing for the map for early access is $55 or $55.99 US dollars, so just under $56. It's live today if you weren't aware that you can purchase it right now. After the Phase 3 release, it's going to go back up to $69.99 US dollars. So not a cheap map by any stretch of the imagination, but get a couple of bucks off there if you're really interested in it at early access. Now, a couple of things I recommend. 205 gigs of drive space for Phase 1. It's recommended that you have 32 gigs of system RAM and 8 gigs of graphics card VRAM. Map highlights include things like buildings with destruction states. All East German bases feature authentic RSBN navigational beacons. Densely packed or placed ground objects throughout the map, but important areas are left open for mission builder object placement for costume or custom scenarios, I think that's probably meant to be. Detailed SAM and AAA sites are scattered throughout the map and co-located with many airfields that can be populated with your air defenses of choice. Whether you're loitering over the folded gap in an A-10, punching through clouds in a Fulcrum, or stalking tanks in a Hind, the DCS Cold War Germany map offers a new and exciting canvas to experience your DCS aircraft. So go over to the eShop and check it out if you haven't done so already. Tons and tons of videos coming out already, and I'm sharing some footage here for you as well, which I hope you are enjoying. Let's talk a little bit about my early impressions, which have been marred actually not by the map quality or the performance quality of the map, but I think from some NVIDIA issues, which particularly this morning caused me quite a lot of grief. So let's tuck into that. So let's talk a little bit about first impressions. I think it's done really well. Lots and lots of objects in Berlins. They've gone to a tremendous amount of trouble to recreate the buildings with a high degree of accuracy. And as far as performance goes, seems to be working pretty well. I was flying around in the Hind, flying around in the Apache, the occasional stutter here and there, but I don't think that is actually necessarily indicative of any fault with Ugra Media's map and DCS World. I think we've got a little bit of a problem right now if you are running NVIDIA graphics cards. There was a release recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, which indicated some problems with the drivers causing performance issues. In fact, for some games, NVIDIA recommended either rolling back the update or not installing it at all. Unfortunately, I already had, and I hadn't played DCS for a while because I've been busy with other projects, etc., etc. And this week, I was doing some recording, and I had a huge problem, particularly this morning. I needed another 10 minutes or so of footage for a couple of aircraft. I wanted to get 10 minutes of footage with the Phantom and also the Mirage F1, and couldn't get it to do what I wanted it to do. Game crashes, problems with compatibility, it seemed, with Steam VR, which is not uncommon. It's not the most stable piece of software from my experience compared to sort of the native software that you can run in OpenXR and stuff like that. So I had some problems there, and then I updated the NVIDIA drivers. I'd already updated the studio drivers, and just constantly having crashes. The recording software in NVIDIA, the instant replay stuff, which I normally use just because it's convenient and I don't have to run a separate program in the background like OBS, which I had done that. Constantly crashing. The controls for the NVIDIA software would disappear. They would show up initially when you launch the game, and then they would disappear. So what was supposed to be a 30-minute, 35, maybe 40-minute exercise in recording the footage that I wanted turned into a 2-hour ordeal, really hampering and frustrating me this morning, making me quite angry, to be honest, because then my wife was wanting me to do things as well, so she was constantly interrupting me while I was trying to troubleshoot that. There's nothing more annoying than being pestered when you're trying to troubleshoot stuff, so really frustrating. So I think the map itself, as I said, is glorious. I think they've done an amazing job. I'm looking forward to further enhancements. Wags pointed out that he thinks the map's going to look amazing in winter texture. I think that is probably true, so we'll have to wait and see for that third phase. And generally just the expansion of the map, looking at more objects. Very excited about the destruction of or destructible objects, and what the map offers in terms of scenarios. Now, there was a really interesting video from Tricker talking about map saturation or map burnout and the challenges with running online servers where some of these new maps are not actually being well represented. He mentioned Kohler as an example. A lot of the servers are not running some of these newer maps, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., so that can limit some of the quality that you're looking for, perhaps with regards to online play. And I don't know how we combat that. It comes down to the individual people that are running the servers and the players that are willing to fly on those servers. If you are looking for volume of players on servers, it's probably easier to use the free maps or the more popular maps that have been around for a while. Nallis, it's probably not all that popular, but that would be one. Persian Gulf is well established. Syria is probably well established. But some of these newer maps, like Sinai, etc., certainly Afghanistan, certainly Iraq, and I think in some way probably because they haven't been fully fleshed out yet, they're still work in progress, there is a lack of representation of some of these maps. So Tricker's argument is a good one. There's nothing wrong with the map, and I want to stress that. It's not the quality of the maps themselves, the performance of the maps, that they just don't seem to be as well represented perhaps. And the question is raised whether we have too many maps. Is there map saturation? Now personally I don't think there is. I think it's difficult because these maps that we're seeing coming out in the last couple of years are pushing the envelope of what is capable of being produced in DCS world, and so it's a good signal for the future of the game. The problem again, of course, is I guess you could have too much choice. It's a difficult balance, but overall I think it's positive that we have that many choices. We're seeing a large number of aircraft that we can fly. The scenarios able to be produced if you have the time to produce them and the willingness to do that. That's a labor of love in its own right, but it provides a lot of opportunity for some really cool gameplay. But again, it's a time thing, and then there's a limitation in the player base, etc., and the content creators, which is why I think some of the campaigns are still very, very popular, because a lot of people don't want to have to establish their own scenarios. So we're in an interesting kind of time, I think, but like I said, I think this map showcases what the game is capable of producing in a large map, but is packed with a lot of material and still able to produce pretty good frame rates and performance rates. I expect there to be more optimization, but we'll see how we go. Let's move on to the data cartridge, and you saw probably a good video from Wags, around about 9 minutes long, showcasing the initial version of the data transfer cartridge, or DTC, that supports, according to the blurb here, custom countermeasure programs and radio presets for the FA-18C and F-16, WAG showcased some different ways of using the data cartridge from the aircraft in the mission editor, so on and so forth. The files can be created by single player and multiplayer pilots prior to entering a mission from the briefing window. Future updates will expand DTC functionality to include navigation. That was something that I hit on last week. I was surprised they didn't include the navigation portion. Nonetheless, this is coming. In addition to navigation, targeting, data link, weapon settings, and much more will also be added. And of course, this will see additional development for the Apache and the A10C2 Warthog. That is also in the pipeline, they tell us. The files can be saved and shared between missions and even other friends and players. So I'll refer you to the quick start guide. I'll try to remember to put a link for that in the description below and WAG's video. You can also use the files that you created and share them under the user files, DTC profiles as well in the forums. As for the updates, obviously we had a pretty decent patch this week. The team went on to say that this version, 2.9.15.9408, also includes new persistent support for scripting API functions, which also work with the mission save feature with custom scripts. Based on user feedback, they have prioritized work on saving destroyed assets and waypoint parameters to the mission save file. This will be coming soon in future updates. Several AI-specific behavior problems were fixed and new JTAC voice lines for calling out weapon types were added. Furthermore, specific DCS core optimizations for resource loading have been implemented, improving cockpit loading and boosting application startup speeds. Again, that depends if you have issues with NVIDIA. I noticed this morning we're loading up the Cold War map. I have pretty long load times, so I've just done a restart here and I'll see if there was an improvement after that, after downloading the latest drivers. But yeah, a little bit frustrating, some of that. But again, I don't think it's a map issue or DCS issue. I suspect entirely related to some of these NVIDIA driver updates.
Hey, showtime, dead, MiG-2.
Test dead, MiG-2 and 3 are out for gas, showtime.
MiG-3, MiG-2 is 10015, 38,000.
As part of this big patch this week, ED also did quite a lot of updates to all of its aircraft, pretty much all of its aircraft, I believe, got updates ranging from the F-16 right down to the Yak-52, which is receiving regular updates, which is kind of nice to see. I haven't flown that in a while, so I'll have to check that out. But there's several aircraft that received updates, including the F-5E. They have added or fixed liveries of static F-5E3, for example, fix things like the main landing gear and canopy animation issues, so on and so forth. So there's some work going on there. But the big news really was work from Argus on the Mirage F1, and that is an aircraft I want to spend some more time getting to grips with. But they did a lot of updates, particularly around weapons and also input controls, but they fixed things like rockets not exploding on impact, IR missiles becoming hung if the missile button was momentarily pressed and released. There's a missile launcher safety flap, which was added for the R550 missile that prevents it launching at speeds of less than 150 knots, excuse me. And some updates to AIM-9 missile launch logic and stuff like that. So some good updates there. But the big one really was Heatblur, who have a sale going on right now, the Triumvirate, for the Phantom II, the F-14, and the Viggen. So it's a good time to pick up all three aircraft if you want to spend a few extra bucks and bundle and save rather than buying them individually. But here's some interesting news that I think is worth focusing on for this particular aircraft. One, they've added now support for the user-made Jester mods, which they had talked about previously. So they've added a checkbox for mission designers, and they're asking you to see the manual for the modding chapter on details with regards to that. So this was a way in which players can now basically control Jester or make modifications to Jester, which Heatblur has previously, not allowed us to do. And this was promised early on when they were talking about the development of the Phantom II and some things that they wanted to do differently with the Jester AI, which is pretty cool. Now they've done an audio overhaul, so they've reintroduced major J79 audio overhauls here. They've adjusted the HOW trigger ranges. They've revamped several major sound samples, and they've improved co-driving sound sample playback in various situations, for example, say a flyby. They have done a complete overhaul of the new hydraulics system. Excuse me, that was a tricky one. They've overhauled the entire hydraulics system, allowing for more flexible time step and performance improvements. They've improved CPU performance without reducing simulation fidelity. They've improved the flow restrictors and actuator simulation for better stability. Improved component connection order, ensuring proper flow and time to stabilize pressure along the entire circuit. Improve the pressure distribution and energy for the entire hydraulic system. So quite a lot of work going on there. They've added landing gear small door smoothing for more animation fidelity. They've fixed the bombing tool computing delta altitude wrong for dive tossed. Added bombing tool show. No solution if the drag coefficient is beyond max 9.99. Magnetic compass overhaul for better accuracy. They've added inhibition of just a radar call out shortly after takeoff. They've moved JTAC menu to the bottom of the comms menu to avoid it hiding the dash 4 menu. They've improved the mouse over hint for toggling the mirrors. They've adjusted symbology for the increased acquisition of height and decreased wings length to be more accurate to the real DSCG screen. They've fixed the AGM 12C bullpup not working on Chinese clients. They've added SAMP 250 shoot retarded bombs, high drag. They've fixed minor issues with the WSO ball textures. They fixed engine windmilling, rattling sounds not being audible even with heavy wind. The aural tone knobs initialized to low on cold start. Added pitch, trim, feel, neutral position smoothing settable from the special options menu. They've increased the pitch, feel, trim, dampening, reduces stick oscillations. They've added keybinds for radar, altimeter, test button, low altitude, warning knob. Added missing keybinds for the TACAN panels. They've added access bind for the HUD shutter. They've fixed the increase-decrease command misbehavior in some knobs. Example is the IFF code rollers. They've added new BFM missions added a new BFM mission by Heatblur. Reduced the file size for training missions. And they've had some corrections here for some of the training missions. Lesson 01B, they've corrected the checklist page triggers. Task 5 and 01B, they've replaced the checklist page 2, now reads left boost pump. And to be continued with step 13. And then lastly here, task 5, replaced the checklist page 3, now reads continued from step 12. They've updated the Frog 7 mini campaign and updated Chinese localization, and they've also updated the in-game manual as a result of some of these changes. F-14 also received some work, like I said. Some of the highlights here include the afterburner for one engine displaying with major delay when switching cameras, fixed a potential hitch that would occur when nearing an F-14 Tomcat of any type. The RWR fixed the HB F4E display as AI on the RWR. Threat library updated to version RE41, and they've updated some missions from reflected simulation in the instant action missions. So good news there. And they've updated the Vigid manual as well. Getting back to just the general here updates, lots of updates for the campaigns as a result of the latest update. These are pretty typical updates that need to be fixed or need some tweaking for the campaigns whenever there's a major patch like this. So I expect to see more of this in the future.
Make 3, you'll land at 090, 25, 21,000, make 3 for cutoff, that's realizing setting 120. Copy that, bandit is 100, 20,
Got good steering to the next turn point.
Well, let's turn to some news not covered in the main newsletter, but still relevant to the DCS verse, which we occupy, and a couple of announcements from Baltic Dragon, which I think you're going to be excited about. Firstly, he revealed that he's doing a full set of training missions for the C-130J Super Hercules. These will be built in the Iron Flag style that we've seen in the past from him. If you're not familiar with Baltic, similar to Reflected Simulations, and you should be familiar with Baltic because he produces some damn good campaigns, is basically what I'm going to tell you. He works with a lot of real-world pilots, everyone from Casmo through to Ward Carroll, John Rain Waters, and others besides, producing campaigns that really do challenge you from the beginner through to even experienced DCS players. So this is really exciting news. we're going to see here full comms. He said that pilots would use, and it's going to be a focus on different aspects of the flight there using those comms and things. So it's going to be an interesting little campaign, or if you like, a set of missions perhaps. And I expect there will be a campaign of some kind in the future, where that's going to be set, who that's going to be worked with. Maybe if you're a C-130 pilot or have experience flying the Hercules, maybe you should reach out to Baltic Dragon and touch base and see if that's something that you're interested in. I think it's a good signal here that we're going to see this aircraft in-game soon. Remember, it's being produced by Airplane Simulation Company, ASC. They have a Discord there. I haven't seen any specific new announcements with regards to that, so stay tuned. But I'm hopeful that we're going to see this particular aircraft in-game. Covers a niche, I guess, that is growing in terms of interest regarding transport of logistics, supplies, and things like that, which I think are going to slot in nicely, potentially, to the dynamic campaign, which we're also waiting for as well. So lots of thoughts on that. The other announcement that he made, which I'm really excited about, is that he's working with Casmo, whom I mentioned before, in another Iron Flag style training campaign for the Apache. The first mission apparently is complete, and it's going to be a blast, he tells us. All the scripts are written by a guy who flew this beauty in real life and who will also be your instructor. So huge thanks to all of these real-world pilots like Casmo and various others, Tricker as well, who has aviation experience, not necessarily combat from my understanding, but they're still willing to produce content for us that we can learn from and get the best out of these aircraft, and have that experience of pretending to be a real pilot, not just an absolute ass clown in the sky. Although there's lots of fun to be had clowning around, sometimes it's nice to be able to pretend that I have some knowledge of what I'm actually doing and I can actually look quasi-professional. And it's hard to do that on your own and learning these things fresh, because even in the real world, pilots have instructor pilots helping them along, teaching them, training them. And also, you know, when you have a trainer, they can teach you shortcuts and things like that that help you learn things that sometimes, you know, going rote by the manual may not always be applicable, or harder to learn because of the way that it's phrased, etc., etc. So the real world experience with these aircraft is, you know, unbeatable. So yeah, really cool. We'll see how that comes to pass in the game in the near future. So stay tuned, is all I can say there.
Showtime, relay for MiG-3, kill nose 15, delayed 15 seconds.
Control.
MiG-3 for cutoff, reference 150. MiG-3, I'm going to take you into the south lane.
A quick correction from last week. I did omit the fact that the South Atlantic map is not one of the ones that's embargoed under the request from Razbam to pull modules from the DCS e-store. And I had that in my original script that if I didn't mention that fact, I was going to get a kicking from the map team. And I omitted that, and I got a kicking from the map team who reminded me, hey man, don't forget the South Atlantic map is still on sale. So that's the bottom line there. Good news. The South Atlantic map is not subject to those embargoes. You can still buy it. And I think one of the things I'm interested in is I think the C-130J will be a useful aircraft to fly down there, because you've got a little bit more room to, you know, test out its long-haul capabilities compared to some of the other maps, which are a little bit limiting in terms of the size. In fact, it was one of the things that Wags brought up with why we don't have some of the long-haul bombers in game, and why ED's not developing those, simply because some of the maps are small enough that it's a little bit redundant to be using long-haul aircraft in those particular conflict zones. So I think the South Atlantic is going to be useful for those of you who like maybe long-haul flights and hauling freight around, but there is that scope for a little bit of a longer flight parameter. So I like that map. Obviously, I have an emotional investment in it because I was involved in some of its development in a very minor way. So I have an attachment to the map in terms of seeing it develop over several years now, and also working with the people that helped create it. And it's been fun to be part of that particular journey. And I always feel the map was, you know, it received a little bit of a bad rep. And I always feel a little bit disheartened by that, because I think the work that they have done exposed what DCS was capable of early on, and as the game has evolved, the potential of maps like that offer a lot more. C-130J, maybe even a dynamic campaign as a theater in that area could offer some really interesting opportunities. So I think one of the struggles for that map is that it doesn't have a lot of content attached to it, so it makes it harder for solo players looking for instant action missions and campaigns or mini missions, etc., etc. It doesn't offer quite the same variety that some of the more popular maps, certainly, say for example, the more intense regions of the world, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Persian Gulf, where we've had our sights focused over the last 20, maybe 30 years for conflict. The South Atlantic has a distant memory for maybe people in Argentina and the UK, where those two countries got into a punch-up over the Mariana/Falkland Islands, but it was a very isolated conflict in the grand scheme of things compared to the more global conflicts that we've seen in some of the other maps. So again, I think it was an ambitious map, as I've said before, and I think it showcased what the game was capable of, but the game has moved on quite a bit from there, so I think there's more scope for opportunity in that area. So, and I think that C-130J might be a nice matchup to the strengths of that particular aircraft in a larger field of operations, so we'll see how things go. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of this week's SITREP. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I'll leave you with some images here from the Cold War Germany map, and we'll see you next time on the DCS SITREP.
Inside myself. Myself.